In the time we have together on this occasion, I want to continue the discussion we had from our worship assembly on June the 13th about the church at Laodicea. We talked about several things in that letter that Jesus dictates to John that you find recorded in Revelation chapter 3. And we looked at some slides of some archaeological digs that are taking place in some of the ruins that actually exist there in Laodicea. The fact that they really were not close to a water source, they had to actually have aqueducts that actually carried water to the city. And they're not from the city of Hierapolis across the Lycus Valley, where there were hot springs, and we even showed some slides of those calcium-rich mineral springs that people still visit today because of the reputation of that soothing mineral water that comes from those hot springs. And the archaeologists have not uncovered any kind of aqueducts that actually go from Colossae, which was higher elevation, and brought cool water into Laodicea. What they have discovered are aqueducts that actually come from the southern part, still from mountain springs. But just because the general nature and the area of Laodicea and those other two cities to which they were close, Hierapolis and Colossae, they're well acquainted with what warm water would be like. And the fact that Jesus makes a statement that you're not hot, you're not cold. It says, I wish you were either hot or cold. We talked about just from the general idea of the hot springs and the soothing, healing nature of that water, or the coolness of other water from those mountain springs. It was refreshing. And we talked about the statement that Jesus makes that you're lukewarm. You're not refreshing, you're not soothing, you're not encouraging, you're not healing, you're neither. You're actually lukewarm. And Jesus says, I want to spew you, literally, I want to vomit you out of my mouth. And after that kind of discussion, we talked about where do we fit? Are we individuals that are refreshing to others, or actually do we create more problems we try to solve? Are we individuals that really could care less? We're kind of apathetic, we're kind of lukewarm? Are we encouraging? What type of Christian are we? And then Jesus makes a statement in verse 18 that really kind of reflects upon the way that the populace of Laodicea, including those Christians, view themselves. In fact, he makes a statement that they believe they are rich, verse 17, and become wealthy and have need of nothing, and says, you do not know that you are wretched, miserable, poor, blind, naked. It was a banking center, the city of Laodicea. It was a center of a textile industry. Black wool was something that was known far and wide, traced back to Laodicea. Had a medical school there in Galen, the physician, the very well-known physician of the 2nd century, with all the writing that he did, talks about two medicines that actually were based in Laodicea. Medicines for which Laodicea was well known. One of them being a salve for the eyes. And Jesus says in verse 18, I counsel you to buy from me gold refined in the fire, spiritual gold, not material gold, that you may be rich, in white garments, not the black wool, that you may be clothed. Anoint your eyes with eye salve, that you may see, because spiritually you're blind. But then he says this, and this is what I want to continue for the time we have together. As many as I love, I rebuke and chasten. Verse 19. Therefore be zealous and repent. Jesus has said, you're lukewarm, you're intolerable, and you're making me sick. But I love you anyway. I want you to change. I don't want you to be lukewarm. I want you to be soothing like those hot springs. I want you to be refreshing like those cool waters. But more than that, I want to be there with you and have fellowship with you. Verse number 20. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and dine with him and he with me. And the word that is used for dine carries with the idea of that evening meal. It's actually indicative in ancient literature of a feast. It's not the meal that begins the day. It's not the meal around noontime, which, and both were part of that Jewish and Greek culture. But it was the meal at the end of the day where after work you would find yourself relaxing. After work you would be inviting friends and neighbors to actually experience that kind of end of the day with you. It's a time of fellowship. It's a time where you enjoy the company of those around you. And Jesus says, I want that kind of relationship with you. I don't want you to continue to be lukewarm. I want you to change. One of the questions that's come up, even after we talked about it Sunday, well, doesn't cold mean that these people are just totally outside of any kind of concern for God? I mean, aren't they individuals that are really just kind of, they've thrown God aside? It means that there's a bitterness or just a iciness about their life? Well, not necessarily. In chapter 16 of Luke, where Jesus talks about the rich man and Lazarus, verse 24, the rich man cries to Abraham and says, have mercy on me and send Lazarus that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue. What does cool water involve? It involves something that's refreshing. Or the statement that you find in Matthew chapter 10, then in verse 42. Jesus says, whoever gives one of these little ones only a cup of cold water in the name of a disciple, assuredly I say to you, he shall by no means lose his reward. Cool, refreshing. Now granted, there's another usage of that idea by Jesus as well. In Matthew chapter 24, beginning in verse 9, they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you'll be hated by all nations for my name's sake. Many will be offended and will betray one another and hate one another. Then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. So is it a coldness that you find among the Laodiceans where they don't have a love for God? That's not really what Jesus says. Jesus doesn't say that they have embraced any kind of false teaching. He doesn't say that they are giving up on what they have learned. But the priority for following God has taken second place to the priority of the conveniences that they have around them, the wealth of the city, the textile industry, the famous medicines that are manufactured in Laodicea. We don't have a need of anything. Jesus says you need me more than you know. You need God more than you know. And then in that statement, in verse 20, a statement that says, Jesus doesn't quit. I want to dine with you. I want to share a feast with you. And then in the very next verse, in verse 21, to him who overcomes, I will grant to sit with me on my throne, as I also overcame and sat down with my Father on his throne. I want to share the throne of God with you. I want to share with you spiritual blessings of which you cannot even conceive. You can't even imagine. And I do that with these individuals who have lost sight of the first love, perhaps, in a certain degree, as did Ephesus. But here are people that have become complacent. Here are people that put physical needs above spiritual needs. Here are people that have lost sight of what they need to be and who they need to be because they've lost sight of the one to whom they belong. Jesus doesn't quit on people. Do we? Jesus doesn't stop encouraging people to grow. Do we? Jesus doesn't stop people to be zealous. Verse 19. Do we? Do we want to give in, give up, give out? Jesus didn't even give up on these individuals in Laodicea in a letter that's famous for the fact that they are not hot, they're not cold, they're lukewarm. And Jesus says, I want to vomit you out of my mouth, but I love you, and I want you to change so that I can come in and eat with you and have fellowship with you and actually have you sit with me on the throne of God himself. Interesting letter. Not just the beginning of it, but the end of it as well. Please stay safe. We'll talk again soon.